So in this last lecture, I would like to talk to you and speak with you about the virtue ethics and the rules-based ethics. So you've seen that during all those days, all those hours we've been together, we spoke a lot about virtue, and we almost didn't speak about the rules. And I think it is very important for us to have a clear vision of what is rules-based ethics. What's the mentality of people that are ruled by rules, and what's the difference? What do the virtues in the end of the day give us in terms of ethics? So there is fundamentally two kinds of ethics. As I wrote here, there are two kinds of ethics: rules-based ethics and virtue ethics. The former, as the name implies, is grounded in law. An action is correct if it conforms to the law. Incorrect if it does not. The latter is grounded in human nature. Good is that which brings us closer to moral perfection, greatness. Bad that which leads us away from it. Virtue ethics does not deny the validity of laws, but it does insist that laws cannot be the ultimate foundation of ethics. Laws must be at the service of virtue, that is the proper order of things. Well, we've spoken a little bit about this before when we spoke about the education of children. And you and me, we are aware that young boys and girls don't understand the meaning of virtue because they don't have prudence. They don't understand the relationship between an action, a specific action that they have to fulfill, and the development of their own personality, the self-realization as human beings. They don't understand this relationship. They understand only one thing: I must not. That's very simple. They don't know why, but they just know they must not. So in virtue ethics, intelligence, practical intellect is always in action. That's why virtue ethics makes us intelligent. It is not an ethics of pure obedience. We think. That's why there is an enormous place for freedom, and there is an enormous place for mistake. There is an enormous place for creativity. Law of rules-based ethics tells you that an action is correct when this action conforms with the law. So I am a saint if I don't violate the 10 Commandments. I don't lie. I don't steal. I don't commit adultery. I respect my parents. I am a saint. That's obvious. Obedience. I obey the law. It's beautiful to remember the talk between Jesus, the conversation between Jesus and the young rich man. Jesus was happy of that guy because he obeyed the law. So it's not a bad thing to obey the law. It's a good thing. And this law, the law of the 10 Commandments, it's the law that is written in our heart. So it's something that is rational. It's something that we can know through reason. It's not something that is just for Christians or for Jews. God was good with us, and He reminded us the law when He gave it to Moses on the Mount Sinai. But He could have been without doing this, because that law is written in our heart. It's a rational law. It's a rational moral law. And every one of us has to know that law. If we have a normal life, if we are sincere with ourselves, if we behave according to our conscience, we see that law. We know it's a fact, it's a reality. Even those who deny it, they know there is a law of conscience, and the law of conscience is based on the 10 commandments that are natural commandments. So it's a good thing to obey the law. It's ethics of obedience. We have a law and we obey the law because this law has been given to us by God. And Jesus is very happy of that man when he says that since he's a very young man, he obeys the law. But what's the problem with that man? He didn't practice virtue ethics, so he was limited. He didn't steal. But he was not detached from material things. What's detachment? Detachment is the virtue. It's the virtue of self-control. It's the virtue of those people who have their heart not in material things. It means that this is the virtue of people who practice the virtue of self-control. Self-control is about emotions, about attachments, it's about everything that can enslave our heart. So what we call in the Christian language, poverty, Christian poverty, from a rational point of view, it's a part of the virtue of self-control. It's the control of the attachments. This man didn't practice self-control. He didn't steal, but he had not the virtue of self-control. And he thought he was a good man because he obeyed the law. He was a child. Probably he was 18 or 20 years old, but he was a little child of 5, 6 years old on the ethical level. And when Jesus began to speak to him about virtue, sell what you have, show me that you're detached, show me that you have self-control, and follow me, the guy collapsed. He collapsed. And Jesus was very unhappy. Jesus was very unhappy. At the beginning, he was happy. And at the end, Jesus is very unhappy. And the boy is very unhappy also. We read in the gospel that he went away unhappy. This helps us understand a little bit what's the difference between virtue ethics and rules-based ethics. Rules-based ethics is absolutely necessary as a foundation because we learn to do the right thing. We train our will in obedience to the law, which is the law of conscience and which is the law of God, because God has created us with a specific nature. And this nature is something we have to observe, we have to contemplate, and we have to obey the laws of nature, which is the same thing as obeying God. And I told you the other day that people that don't do those things cannot practice virtue ethics because they have not been even educated in rule-based ethics. They don't have even a vision of what's right and what's wrong. So they have a lot of difficulty. They cannot practice virtue ethics. Well, you have people that are, I would say, blind. They are blind because they are under the power of certain ideologies, but their heart is good. Their heart is looking for the truth. And people like this can practice virtue because there is no corruption of the intellect. They are just blind. Just think about St. Paul. St. Paul was in fact really blind. He was under the power of an ideology. He didn't know the truth, but in the end of the day, he was looking for the truth, but he didn't know it. He was under the power of a deep ignorance. But he was probably virtuous. He was surely virtuous. At least he had all the potentiality for virtue. And the day he converted, he didn't change. He changed his mind, that's right. But his nature cannot change in 1 second. Of course, God's grace can help you do certain things, but your nature doesn't change. It was the same Paul. At the level of character, it was the same guy. 1 minute before his conversion and 1 minute after his conversion. You can change ideas and convictions in 1 second, but you cannot change your character in 1 second. You can't. So you have people that are blind, just blind. But there is a sincerity in their lives, and then in a way, they practice the virtue. They try to do it, and there is a big potentiality for virtue here. And the day they discover the truth, you see that those virtues now are actualized. Yeah. But you have other people, the majority of those who don't accept the truth, it's not out of ignorance that they do the wrong thing. It's just because they don't care for their conscience. They split on their conscience. They look for themselves, they are egoistically minded. And then these people are very far from virtue because they are, first of all, very far from the law. They don't accept the law of nature. They don't accept the law of conscience. So you see, if your life is about rules-based ethics, what's going to happen? Then you're going to think that you have achieved perfection when you observe certain rules. So I observe the rules, then I'm perfect. The truth is that behind each rule of the commandment of God, there is a hidden virtue. And you discover that when you practice virtue. Each commandment of the law of God, in fact, points to a virtue. But you have to make an intellectual effort to discover what the virtue that is hidden behind that. When Jesus came, he said, I'm not coming to destroy the law, I'm coming to implement the law, to the full. He's saying people that you have to interpret the law from the point of view of virtues. This is what it means to fulfill the law, is to understand the whole meaning of the law. The law is for the virtue, not for the law itself. The law points to the virtue. So when God tells, don't steal, what does He tell us? He tells us, practice the virtue of detachment. When He tells us, don't commit impure actions and adultery, He tells us, practice the virtue of purity. When He tells us, don't lie, He tells us, practice the virtue of truthfulness, veracity, sincerity, simplicity. So behind each commandment of the law of God, there is a virtue. And people that live by virtue ethics, they understand the 10 Commandments in that way. And when they go to confession, a sin for them is not just a sin against the law, it's a sin against the virtue that is hidden behind the law. So they would say, the priest, I didn't sin against the commandment. They would say, I sin against the virtue that is behind the commandment. You follow me? So a sin is not just against a law, it's against a virtue that is the perfection towards which we are called. I'm trying to explain to you that we must not separate the law from the virtue. When you think in terms of law, think, what is the virtue that law is pointing to? Don't be okay with the law, like the rich man of the gospel. The thing with the law is that you're okay with the law, you think you're a saint, you think you're a very good person when you observe a law, because the law tells you the correct action is an action that fits the law. And there's a limitation here. In virtue, what's correct? In fact, we don't use the word correct for virtues. because we speak about human nature. We say what's right. You understand the difference? You, after our 4 days classes here, you cannot anymore use the word correct. This is the correct decision, forget it. A correct decision can be to kill someone because it fits the culture. The correct decision can be to lie because it fits the culture. It's correct according to the culture. There is a law in the culture. There is a law of career. There is a law of success. So it's a correct decision if it fits the requirement of success. You see what I mean? Don't use the word correct anymore. It's finished. You will never use that word. Because it's correct according to what? It's not correct according to your nature. It's correct according to something external. That can be an ideology. In Soviet times in Russia, it's very correct to be a member of the Communist Party. It fits the context of success. In modern times, in America and in Europe, it's very correct to do certain things in the business life because they fit the context. But we understand in the deepest of our soul that doesn't fit our Christian nature. That it's correct. It's not right, but it's absolutely correct now. You see, so don't use the word correct. I know in English we use this is correct, this is a correct decision. Finished. You look for the right decision, not for the correct decision. You look for the truth that comes from God, not from the truth that other people are imposing on you. Political correctness, cultural correctness. These are things you must get rid of. Virtue ethics tells you nature. Something is right when it helps you achieve self-realization as a human being, as a human person. So when people ask you what's right in the end of the day for you, tell them it's not a subjective thing. It's not that's right for me and that's wrong for you. It is let's sit together. Is this good for our self-realization as human beings? Do you and me achieve self-realization as we understand the vocation of man and woman as being spiritual beings? Is this good or bad for us, for our spiritual development? And then you understand what's right. It is right because it develops you personally, spiritually as a human being. It helps you achieve your humanity, your humanness, and it helps the common good. So it's not something subjective. We can come to common vision of what's right and what's wrong. If I steal, it's wrong because we understand it corrupts me. It goes against my nature as a free, rational human being that can discover the difference between good and evil. So this is important to explain to people. Virtue ethics is not about an ideology. It's fundamentally about things that we rationally can discover. Of course, God's grace here helps us a lot. Our Christian faith helps us a lot not to make big mistakes in our vision of what's right and wrong. But still, we need to say people that don't share our faith, that through the exercise of reason, they can come to big conclusions, important conclusions that we can share with them because we have a human nature. And if we are sincere with ourselves, if we try to practice the virtue of the will, we have a minimum of light for our prudence, minimum of light to know the truth in practical matters. And we have to defend this point of view. If we don't defend this point of view, then there is no possibility of communication with people. And then we Christians become a kind of ghetto in the society. There is no possibility of communication with the secular world because then there is no reason. Just have faith and that's it. But it's not true. God has been good with us. The faith He gave to us doesn't doesn't destroy our reason, doesn't annihilate the reason that he has given to us. This is what virtue ethics tells us. We need to discover the beauty of it. So you cannot achieve moral perfection through virtue ethics. I mean, you cannot achieve it fully, because it's a call forever. There is no limitation in the practice of virtue. You cannot be too courageous. It's impossible. You cannot be too prudent. You cannot be too just. It's something only Jesus Christ was just, courageous, prudent, temperate, magnanimous, humble. We strive for that. We go towards this, but we cannot achieve it. There is no limitation in virtue. It is a spiritual being. It's a spiritual notion, so there is no limitation in it. So what's the difference is that we are different people, and the person who practices virtue ethics understands holiness is about striving for holiness. The one that is imbued with rules ethics, holiness is about fulfilling the law. And it's very simple. I mean, it's not so easy, but at least very clear about what this is about, and you can achieve perfection in it. You follow me? What I want to tell you here, it is not that you must not obey the law. It is that you must remember always that the aim of the law is the virtue. The law is for the virtue. So the law for the children, what does it do? It helps children practice the virtue when they don't even understand that this is a virtue. So it trains their will, so that when a moment came for them to understand why this is a virtue, they already have the will trained, so they can already practice it.
This virtue sometimes for them as well.
Yeah, for this is a very good question. A virtue tells you have to disobey an unjust law. People that are under the power of political correctness will never think about disobeying a law. But a virtuous person, with great joy, Monseigneur, he will disobey a law. With an incredible joy and happiness. He will disobey an unjust law. People that are under the power of rule-based ethics just cannot disobey a law. But virtuous people will disobey a law because they are freed from the law. There is a German Christian philosopher, theologian, very famous, Spemann. Spemann was used to say that you're free. You are a man or a woman who does something, who doesn't commit a crime because the crime is for it. Put it this way. I'm sorry, my English is very limited. If you don't commit a crime because your nature tells you you're not the kind of person that commits the crime, you're a free person. But if you don't commit a crime because the crime is forbidden by criminal law and you can go to jail, then you're not a free person. So in the end of the day, you do what your virtues tells you to do, not what the law tells you to do. If you're a businessman, you don't slander your competitors. It's not because it's written in the law, the criminal law of the United States, that if you slander people, you can go to jail. It's because you, as a human being, you're not the kind of person that slanders. So in the end of the day, it's your virtues that tells you what to do, not the law. The one that do not slander because it's forbidden by criminal law, full stop, is not a free person. He's a slave. He's a slave of the law. There is no creativity in him. There is no maturity. He is directed by rules. He's ruled by rules. He's not a free person. So in the end of the day, you need to think, the important thing is, I'm not saying we must forget about laws. I'm saying the important thing in our behavior is going to be the product, the result of our virtues. Specifically, the virtue of prudence. But the virtue of prudence, as I told you yesterday, is very much under the power of the virtue of the will. Courage, justice, self-control have an impact on the light of prudence. So, I repeat what I told you the other day about children. If you have children and you tell them, look, it's better that you don't do those things because we are not the kind of people who do those things. And to say to the child, don't do this because it's forbidden. It's a different approach in education. While the child is now, say, 10 years old, he begins to have something is being right to work here. And it's not 5, he's 10 now. And you tell him, don't do this because you are not the kind of man or woman who does those things. He begins to think about who he is, about his own dignity, about the meaning of virtue. And he put aside the idea of laws. Young people don't like laws, especially teenagers. So when you tell them law, they say, get out of here. But when you tell them, who are you? They like it. They begin to be mature. It's a natural process and it's a good spiritual process. I don't want laws. I want to understand who am I. And if you go on speaking to me about laws, when you have to speak to me about my own dignity, then I will not listen to you. And I will violate your laws with great pleasure. So this is a teenager mentality. It's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. But it has to be compensated by the rule, the virtue ethics. If this person is moving from rule-based ethics to the sphere of virtue ethics, if there is nothing to explain him what's going on, well, he can collapse. Because he will say, I don't like those laws. Why those laws? I am more than law. But you don't explain to him that now he's entering the sphere of freedom and that he is responsible for what he's doing and that he's entering the sphere of spiritual growth, the sphere of maturity, the sphere of virtue, but he doesn't know it because parents cannot explain him. So he rejects, throw out the laws, the garbage, and he has nothing to take. You know, he closed the door that he has to close, but there is no door open in front of him. He's between two walls, and he becomes crazy. So really, there is a moment in life where it's so important to speak to people about this. Okay, now you are entering the sphere of virtue ethics because you have prudence, because you can understand many things. You're not only training your will, now you're also training your intellect, your intelligence. You are discovering your nature, your calling. You're becoming a free person. And we have to insist on that, but we have to give those people the doctrine, the science, so that in simple words, that they understand now what's happening to me, what's the direction I have to follow. It's virtue ethics, it's freedom, and it's very attractive because it's creative. There's a lot of freedom there because there is prudence, and prudence, as I told you, is freedom. Because you reflect, you think, you know you cannot know everything, but you begin to investigate. You try to do the right thing, although you know you can make mistakes, but you're not so much afraid because you know that now you are in a sphere where you have to think. And you have to be capable of running risks, also intellectually, also morally. Well, and if you are a Christian, you practice Christian abandonment in God's hands, and you know, okay, I do my best, but I'm not worried. I'm at peace. You know, all those things are riding together. God wants people to be insecure. He doesn't want people to be insecure. He wants them to be insecure. Because in insecurity, you practice the beautiful virtue of abandonment, of faith, hope, charity. You can practice a lot of great things in the supernatural sphere when there is a certain insecurity. And it helps you move forward, ask advices, discover the beauty of life, the richness of different opinions, the richness of different things. It makes you a beautiful human being. So the lack of security is not a bad thing. But the frame for this insecurity has to be there. Because if there is no frame for insecurity, you just don't understand who you are and where you go. And then you collapse. So if you have an intellectual and moral frame for this insecurity, you know, I am in insecurity, but inside a frame. So I'm not alone. The insecurity it's a rule. But there is a hand that takes care of me in this insecurity. I'm not alone. And all this becomes understandable when we practice virtue ethics. So virtue ethics is about what's right and what's wrong from the point of view of your human nature. There are principles of human nature. And you cannot violate those principles, because if you violate them, you destroy yourself. So what's right? It's that which fits the principles of human nature, which requires a certain reflection, of course, a certain reflection about what is my human nature about. First of all, about the objectivity of human nature, and second, about what can we know about human nature through reason. In the rules-based ethics, about just what's correct, and then there is a whole world of correctness, I repeat, that can be whatever you want. It can be professional correctness in a job, in a way of behaving of certain people, cultural trends. We spoke a lot about the cultural trends in prudence, how we must free ourselves from those cultural trends. But cultural trends for many people, these are the 10 Commandments. This is the law. It's a trend. I must do what the others do. If not, I look like a strange person. It's a law. It's as strong as the laws of communism. And it's even stronger, because the laws of communism are just crazy. But those cultural trends, very often you don't understand how crazy they are. Okay, you follow me? Oh, you follow me, that's good.
Dr. Havard, would you say that maybe the greatest cultural battle today is what is human nature? That's what's causing a lot of our difficulties. Augustine said, "Love God, do what you will," which is virtue. But that great battle of human nature. What is human nature?
I will tell you, the most fundamental thing is not even that. It's worse than this. It is that they say we don't have human nature. So it's much more powerful than when we thought. 20 years ago, it was about what's the human nature. And many people said, we can understand human nature through reason. So everything is subjective. Now we made a step forward, which is we don't even have to think about those things that are ridiculous things. We don't have human nature. There is no such a thing as a human nature, even biological. Even biological nature is denied. Even biological nature is denied. There is a French very famous woman, Elisabeth Badinter. She was the wife of a former Minister of Justice in France. She wrote a book in which she explained it very well. This was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. We need to free women from womanhood. And we need to free men from manhood, because these are slavery. Your womanhood and your manhood is an instrument of slavery. There is no such a thing. You are what you want to be, and you can be something else than a man or a woman. You re-engender yourself. You create yourself. We are at that level. So when we are at that level, and this is the level that is in the mind of many people, we made a step forward. People are not discussing now what's human nature. They are discussing something else. Is there or not a human nature? And they say there is no human nature. Nature, natura, means slavery for them. You're born with something. Something is imposed on you. They say this is incredible. We are the highest level of pride, which is you are not born. You created yourself, and you have the You have the freedom to create yourself every moment, every day, in the way you want it. So give me peace. It's the maximum of pride. It's really to take the place, really, the absolute place of God in creation. So the denial of human nature, of course, makes totally impossible the idea of virtue, because virtue is grounded in human nature. So we are becoming pure thinking subject. Like Descartes was used to say, des sujets pensants. We are thinking subjects. That's what we are. So there is nothing in common between me and Ryan, because there is no human nature. Before we thought, oh, he's a human, I am a human, so we are the same kind, so we can communicate. Now it's no, he's not a human. I am not a human. I am what I want to be. I can be a star, I can be the moon, whatever, you know what I mean? We are just thinking subjects. And that's the way we are. And of course, it doesn't fit reality. It's an incredible ideology. It's even more brutal than I would say than Marxism. It's much more brutal than Marxism. It's biological, so it's a complete destruction of the human structure. But it's easier. It's easier, and especially I would say for many people, it's pleasant, because then you do whatever you want. You recreate yourself, you reinvent yourself. And of course you collapse, because this human nature is here. You cannot deny it, it's a reality. So you go against your own self, and you destroy yourself, but with great pleasure. That's the evil thing about it. With great pleasure, you destroy yourself, because you don't recognize that you have a self that has been given to you. Remember, this word natura comes from born with, which means people who deny nature is because they deny the idea that they were born with something. You follow me? They just create themselves. Yeah. Well, it's a very unhappy way of thinking, because I was thinking a lot about this, and you're very alone. Eh? You're very alone. When you know that you've been created, so that God has created you, so He has control on you. When you know He's a Father and He's Almighty, you say, even if I'm an idiot, I'm still in His hands. But if you deny nature, after denying God, deny createdness, and you think that you are creating yourself, you must feel very alone, because you feel your miseries and limitations at every second in your life. And you must think, well, there is no one else than me that is taking care of my life. It must be hell. Those people, if they are really ideologically inside us, they must be very afraid. They're very unhappy. You know? Because we feel our limitation. Even those people who are ideologically oriented, they cannot be without feeling their own limitations every moment. There are many things they want to do and they cannot do it. So they understand they are not gods, but they want to be gods. They want to behave as gods, but they are not, and they feel they are not. They just become crazy in this. So they must be very, very unhappy, these people, very unhappy. And we have to pray for them a lot, because they're crazy, and they are moving humanity towards hell, but themselves, they have hell inside. It's probably the last ideology that's possible. That would be probably the end of all the ideologies. The denial of the existence of the human nature. Yeah, because the experience of humanity shows us that people have known those things since the dawn of time. When you think, for instance, that's why it's so important for us to mention Aristotle, Plato, the ancient Greeks, even Confucius, you will see. Because these people tell us that 2,500 years ago, they knew already those things. And that has been only, I would say, 50 years. I mean, the intellectual crash began with Descartes. That's right, intellectually speaking. Cogito ergo sum, I think, then I am. So the mixture, this confusion between being and thinking, or reducing the being to thinking, created a world of subjectivity that is just incredible. When you reduce being to thinking, cogito ergo sum, I think, then I am, which means that the being is reduced to your thought. Then you produce being by thinking. Then in the end of the day, you come to the philosophy of Kant, which is the top of the pyramid, I would say, where everything becomes subjective. And you cannot enter the world of objectivity. Yeah, everything is a product of your consciousness in Kant. Your God, your philosophical God, is a product of your consciousness. You cannot enter into contact with your philosophical God. You cannot, through reason, discover God. The God that you believe in is a product of what you have in your conscience. I'm not going to enter into details, but this began 300 years ago, this process of subjectivization of the human thinking, before we had realism. The realism of the ancient Greek was extraordinary. Man has his place in the cosmos, and we try to discover what's our place. Everything is objective. There's an order in nature, and we try to discover where we stand. Of course, the philosophy of 300 years gave us something about this idea that we are also subjects. We are not only objects, so we are subjects. There was something good in this philosophy. There was a part of truth. But this philosophy as an ideology, like any ideology, shows part of the truth and tell you it's the whole truth. That is what is an ideology. An ideology looks at the part of the truth and tells you it's the whole truth. This is what is an ideology. It's a part of it, and they say it's everything. So there is a truth in each ideology. But the truth of Marxism is very simple, is that capitalism is brutally unjust. That's it. There is a truth there in Marxism. There is historical truth. If not, there wouldn't have been such an ideology. So each ideology has a part of truth. And this ideology of subjectivism has a part of truth, which is we are subjects. We are not only object, we are subjects. So it's true. But I would say that there's a corruption really of the human mind after the Second World War, especially the 1960s, where people collapsed as moral beings in the 1960s, and we are now paying the consequence of that. All those people that are in power now, they were brought up in the 60s, so their mentality is the mentality of the 60s, but they had no power before. Now they have it, and they are the same. Like in the European Union, all those people in power in the European Union, who are they? Former Maoists, Trotskyists, Marxists. Of course, they will not tell you about Marx, Mao, and Trotsky because they are not very popular nowadays. But their way of thinking is exactly the same. They are materialistically oriented. They have a vision of man that is the bottom line. They are materialistic. They are subjectivistic, and they are in the power. They have power in the European Union. The same in the United States. The same in the United States. People like Clinton, Obama, they don't come from the blue. They have a history, and this history is the same as European history in the 1960s. But now they're in power. Now they're in power.
Alex, from your perspective, is there a danger? What does the danger look like when Christians pursue their faith as any other?
When Christians?
Pursue their faith, understand their faith as an ideology.
When Christians understand their faith as an ideology, okay. Well, there is no, as I have told you, in Christianity, there is no place for ideology. First, because they have the whole truth. And then we don't see a part of it, we see the whole truth. So we cannot be ideologically oriented. The problem is when people call themselves Christians, yeah, and they look at their religion as rules. No virtue but rules. So the intellect is disappearing, so no place for prudence. And then Christianity will be just about obeying rules. And those who don't obey those rules are idiots, and we are saints because we obey the rules. That is a destruction of the human mind. It makes holiness impossible. It creates fanaticism and crazy people. So faith really is very far from being an ideology, because Christianity is fundamentally based on the virtues. You know, there could be a place, I would say, in Judaism for ideology, but in Christianity, unthinkable. Unthinkable, because all the Christian system is based fundamentally on the idea of virtue, natural virtue and supernatural virtue of faith, hope, and charity. You see, so there is an enormous place, the importance of thinking, of prudence, of the truth, of the intellect is enormous in Christianity. Enormous. There is no place for idiots in Christianity. I mean, there is no place for people who want to be idiots. It's impossible. If you're an idiot, you cannot be a Christian. Prudence is foundational, as I told you. As a natural virtue, and the virtue of faith acts on our prudence. The virtue of faith acts on our prudence. You can't isolate those two things. You have people without culture because they were not educated in big business schools. They couldn't go to school, but they are not ideologically oriented because they have been practiced the virtue since they were young. You have people who cannot write, cannot read, but they are not idiots, because we can say they have no education. I would say formal education, but they have an incredible informal education with the education to virtues. And they are far from being idiots. I gave you the example of Joan of Arc. She was absolutely uneducated, but she was educated by her parents, but she was not educated in schools. She couldn't write, she couldn't read. She was a beautiful example of virtues. So when I say idiots, I mean people that are morally idiots. So ideology is very much for people that don't care for the intellect and focus on the will. That's why the world in which we've been living in the 20th century was very much Nietzschean. It was a world of will. An ideology is a will. So an ideology, what does it do? What does it do? It destroys, first of all, the intellect. It destroys. It's pure will. The Nazi ideology, the communist ideology, the individualistic liberal ideology is destroying the intellect of people. It focuses on the will. And it destroys ethics, because the foundation of ethics is not the will, it's the truth, it's the intellect. First, you have to identify what's right and what's wrong. Then after, you have to do the right thing. But first, you have to identify. The foundation of ethics is the truth, not the will. So the intellect, not the will. So by destroying the importance of the intellect, we destroy the foundation of ethics. And we create the world of ideologies. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and all the French that came after that. So the will, willpower. You do what you want. The importance to achieve, to achieve the freedom of the will, the power of the will. So I repeat, in Christianity there is really no place for ideology, and there is no place for fanaticism. So I read with you, the 10 Commandments serve virtue, and in so doing transcend themselves, becoming much more than a series of negative moral prohibitions. Thou shalt not steal, understood in the light of virtue, becomes practiced detachment in relation to the things of this world. Thou shalt not kill becomes cherished life and respected always. Jesus Christ repeatedly links moral prohibitions to positive virtues and makes it clear that God the Father wills the moral perfection of each one of us. Be perfect, he says, as your heavenly Father is perfect. We develop virtues because we want to resemble our Father, which is truth, goodness, and beauty. There is in virtue a deep existential moment that there is no in rule-based. It is the idea that by developing virtues, we resemble the Father. So the motivation for virtue, the highest motivation for virtue is to be like God our Father. So fatherhood and sonship are the motivation for us for developing virtues. This is just at the level of the motivation is extraordinary. Because then you understand I try to be courageous because my Father is courageous. And then divine filiation, divine sonship become the heart of your life. And you do things because you're a son of God or a daughter of God, and not because it's prohibited or because it's allowed. You do this because you're a son or a daughter of Him. And then you grow in self-dignity. You grow in awareness of your personal dignity, and you grow in magnanimity. Do you understand what I mean? Christ is not saying, He doesn't say just be perfect or be holy. He said be perfect because your Father in heaven is perfect. Be holy because your Father in heaven is holy. So Christ is telling us that the motivation for our self-perfection, the motivation for our growth in virtues, is to be like the Father. And this is very attractive for people that have a deep sense of divine filiation, divine sonship, who understand that the foundation of Christian life is awareness of this very deep reality of our divine filiation. This is the foundation of ethics, of Christian ethics. It is, why do you do this? I do this because I am a son of Him. I do this because I'm a daughter of Him. This is why we do things, and this is why we don't do certain things. This is the highest motivation. It is the highest motivation for morality, from the point of view of Christian. We behave like that because we are His children. We do the right thing because He is the truth. So we don't do the right thing because it's written that we have to do it. We do it because we are like Him. This gives people an enormous sense of personal dignity. Enormous. So remember, when we speak about the virtues, we speak about God, the Father. And so I repeat, fatherhood, divine filiation, these are basic, these are the primary concept of Christian life, because God has always been Father and has always been Son. So we are entering, I would say, the intimacy of God when we practice the virtues. We become like Him. I repeat, this has to be our real motivation. And then you see this motivation is very high and it's very attractive. It's very attractive. It's the motivation of people that are free. We would never insist enough in Christianity in this aspect of divine filiation, divine sonship, as the foundation for all our actions. It's the foundation of morality. The highest foundation of morality in Christianity is this. God is my Father, I am His son or His daughter, so I am in His presence, I behave as such. That's it. Like the daughters and the sons of the kings in the presence of the king, their father, they do the best as they can. This is exactly what happens with God our Father. We do the best as we can in His presence. So it has to be the highest motivation. How leaders behave is determined less by the law than by their virtues. We will not grow in virtue if we do not obey the commandments. If I worship sex, money, power, if I blithely trash the reputation of others, if I fail to honor my parents, in short, if I fly in the face of the commandments, I am on the slippery slope to personal disintegration. And yet, if I am intent on personal excellence, I must do more than observe the letter of the commandments. I must cultivate and live by the virtues to which the commandments point. The law acts from outside. after it has helped us understand what is good and what is evil, and after it has given rise to a habit, the virtue itself becomes the rule. How leaders behave is determined less by the law than by their virtues. If, for example, leaders do not slander their competitors, that is not so much because slander is forbidden by both moral and criminal law, as because people of character would not stoop so low in the first place. It simply would not occur to them. This is, in a few words, what we've been saying during this hour. Virtue aims at human perfection, not mere professional rectitude. The work ethics. We've been speaking a lot about work ethics, especially in America. Well, it comes from Luther, this idea of work ethics. So it's normal that in a country where there's a lot of Protestants, people speak a lot about that. What's the problem with the concept of work ethics? The problem with the concept of work ethics is that it makes people think that there is an ethics for work and that there is another ethics outside work. For instance, at home, or for instance, in a bar on Friday evening, wherever it is, but outside work, after 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm another person. I don't follow the rules. Work ethics has a lot to do with the rules. I pay my bills, I keep my word, you can trust me in business. But outside business, I do what I want. I'm an animal. This is the problem with the concept of work ethics. If you practice virtue, there is no work ethics. There's just virtue. And the virtue is always in action. At work, in family, in a bar on Friday, with friends, you're the same. Your virtues are in action. And you try to practice them all the time. So these virtues give you unity of life. There is no compartmentation of your life. Work here, family here, church on Sunday, golf, tennis. You are not playing roles. You are the same at any moment in every place. There is a unity in your life and people notice this unity. You're the same. The way you treat your children is the same as the way you treat your employees. People that live by work ethics, there will be a difference. There will be a difference. There are the rules of the work. So work ethics has a lot to do with rule-based ethics. A lot. We have codes of ethics in companies very often. Our values. But if the people in the organization don't practice the virtue, this is a fake, it's hypocrisy. A lot of wonderful values, this is what we believe in. I'm not saying it's bad to have a code of ethics for your company. I'm speaking about the limitation of it. If people think this is what we are, this is not what you are, guys. This is what you like. But you are someone else. You are your virtues. So you can have beautiful codes of ethics who tells you what you want, how you want to show off to the world. But this doesn't mean that you are like this. Because maybe you lack the virtues that support those values. And very often they lack it fundamentally. So a code of ethics, it's a way of helping people practice the virtue. Like any law. It's not an end in itself. It's just a means. But it has to be said very clearly to people. If you don't say that to people, they think that they are saints because they have a code of ethics in their organization. We're ethical people. Look at our rules. And these people can be brutally immoral at the personal level. What they want is just a respectability. They want to be perceived as really moral. So it's not a bad thing to be perceived as moral beings, because it's good to be perceived as moral beings in your professional activity. But in terms of self-perfection, it doesn't give you anything if you don't make an effort to practice the virtues. You know, virtue, it's a very specific value. It is a value. Of course it's a value of virtue. It's something you value. But remember, it's a dynamic thing. A value normally is not dynamic because it's outside you. God is a value. You believe in God. It's a value for you. Family is a value. You believe in family. It's something you value. It's outside you. Country. You love your country. It's a value for you. These are values, but these are not virtues. They are not a part of yourself. A virtue is a dynamic strength. It's power. It's you. It's inside you. It is that thing that gives you the capacity to achieve your values. You can say, I love God. I value God. Okay, but if you are not sincere because you don't practice the virtue of sincerity, how will you love God? You lie to yourself all the time. So if you lie to yourself, you're lying to Him. You see what I mean? God can be a value for you, but you cannot love Him because you don't have the basic virtue of sincerity. I love family. Family is a virtue for you, but you never practice the virtue of self-control. So you get drunk or you get angry as soon as people contradict you. Well, you're not ready to marry, obviously. So you say, I love family. Yes, you love family, but you cannot achieve family values because you lack a basic virtue that is called self-control. So you cannot just live with other people. Forget about that. I love country. I love nation. Well, let's look a bit about courage. Well, you have no courage. You're not bold. You have no endurance. You have no capacity to defend your country in a war. You don't have the virtue for that. But you love your country. It's a value for you. Do you understand the difference? Virtue is a dynamic force. Virtus in Latin means power, strength. Speaking about this, it's interesting to understand the history of our science. The ancient Greeks were used to use the word arete when they understood the word virtue. There was the word arete. The word arete in ancient Greek means perfection. It was a perfection of nature for them. They were used to contemplate it. They were very contemplative people, the ancient Greeks. And they used this word. We speak about aretology. Aretology is the science of virtues. When the Romans discovered this concept of arete, they changed the word into virtus. Why? Because the Romans are pragmatic. They don't have the same contemplative mind as the Greek people. But they're very practical people, the Romans. So for them, this idea of perfection was not clear at all. Perfection of human nature. But the idea that it is a power that gives you the capacity to do certain things, this was clear for them. That's where the Greek word arete changed totally. And it didn't become aretus or arete, it became virtus, which means power, energy. Because the Romans saw in virtue the practical aspect of it. But now we see how important it is, this knowledge of history. If I ask you what's more important, the contemplation or the action, now you know at the end of 4 days that both are important. You know that virtue has to be desired because it's a virtue, because it's a perfection of nature, because it gives us self-achievement. And at the same time, we also need them for action. But we must not desire virtue just for action. We must not be purely Romans. Before being Romans, we have to be Greek. This is the right thing. There is a logic here. There is logic in thinking. There is a metaphysical logic. There is an existential logic, and there is also a Christian logic. You want virtue for virtue itself, because it is a perfection of nature, and you want to be like God your Father. At the same time, you know that virtue is virtus, not only arete, which means it's a power that gives you the capacity to do certain things, the capacity to make the right decisions, the capacity to stay the course, the capacity to direct your emotions, and the capacity to give each one what is due to him. The capacity to strive for great things, and the capacity to serve. These are capacities. Yeah? So we need to have the whole picture of what virtue is, the contemplative aspect of it, and the active aspect of the virtue. That's why, remember always those two words. Virtue is arete and virtus. If you have this in your mind, then you will understand the importance of developing virtues. So work ethics, I remind you, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying there is a problem with the concept of work ethics. It's the problem of moral compartmentation of your life and considering business life as the ethical sphere per excellence, and the other life not ethical at all, amoral. Amoral means without morality. Not necessarily immoral, but amoral. I would like to finish with this. The concept of work ethics may lead some to believe that there are two kinds of ethics, one for work and another for off hours. Some people are vigilant about maintaining a strict code of conduct at work, but regard private life as another matter. Yet, they are absolutely certain that they are ethical people because they observe a corporate code of conduct, behave in a generally professional manner, and pay their bills. They lead a double life. Leaders, by contrast, behave virtuously always and everywhere, at work, with the family, among friends, during free time, and even when they're alone. This is because they live by true ethics, which unify one's personality and daily activities, both public and private, thereby making the living of a double life impossible. Here we finish by this beautiful Chinese ideogram, not diagram, but ideogram. What's that? I tell you that the man without virtue is the non-man. There is no moral concept more universal than virtue. It is virtue that makes a man a man. Ren in Chinese, Jin in Japanese. The man without virtue, Fai Ren, He Nin, is not merely immoral. He is the non-man, as indicated in this ideogram, which represents negation and the lie, interior disintegration, juxtaposed with the ideogram representing man. So it's interesting to see that in Confucius had the same vision of Aristotle, that morality, it's not about laws. Morality, it's fundamentally about self-realization. So for him, like for the Eastern culture, Far East culture, the immoral is the no-man. The non-man. It is that for them, you're immoral not because you don't obey certain rules, it's because you are not a human being. The immoral is the one that has not, in a way or another, become a human being. So they had this vision that was already in the ancient Greeks, that through virtue you achieve self-realization, you become what you are. Pindar was used to say, Pindar is one of the first writers, I think 500 years before Christ. He already wrote, become what you are. Beautiful words that we'd like to repeat a lot. What does this mean? It means that you're born, of course, a human being, but you have to become a human being. It's not just ontological thing. It is a process. By developing the virtues that are human virtues, you become what you are, a human being. The more you practice the virtues, the more you are a human being. Well, it's not about Übermensch and Untermensch, like Hitler would say. It's not about being the Superman and the other one. it's about being more a human being means that you practice more the virtues, so you are more human. The level of your humanness can grow. The level of your humanness can grow, or humanity can grow. It depends on the virtues and how you practice them. So the more you practice the virtue, the more you are as a human being. As Thomas Aquinas was used to say, the virtue, it's the highest way of being on the natural level. Because the highest way of being on the supernatural level is, of course, supernatural grace. But the natural level, the highest point in being, it's virtue, natural virtue. So this is a nice ideogram, you see. It's a non-man. You don't achieve your nature, you don't achieve human nature in full when you don't really try to practice the virtues. And this is important to show people because this shows us that what we're speaking about is very rational. Because Confucius and Aristotle is not the same time and it's not the same place. And they have exactly the same intuition about what's morality about. So this is very powerful argumentation to show people, look, it's not just about Aristotle, it's not just about the ancient Greeks. This is, the whole history of humanity is about that. So people see it's a serious thing. It's not an ideology. This is a science that has been time-tested. Time-tested, and not only in Europe and America. Time-tested in the most ancient civilization of the world. So not to pay attention to this would be a sign of idiotism or pure ideology. People ideologically oriented, what do they want? They want to destroy Greek language, Latin language, and very soon Chinese language, so that we don't remember those things. All this process of disintegration of the ancient language in Europe and in America has a history. It's not because we become lazy. It's because there are certain people that are absolutely not interested in reminding people that there is such a language like Greek and Latin, and then in those languages there is a history and there are notions, there are ideas that can be used for that, you know. So let's do a little bit of Greek to, well, with me we have not met so much Greek language together. I told you only two words. Arete and megalopsychia. Do you remember the megalopsychia? It's magnanimity. And arete is virtue. We pronounce only two words. And one Latin word, virtus. So it was not a class on Latin and Greek language. So this is the end of not the end, it's just the beginning of many great things in your life. I think we'll make a break now, and after that break, you write up things, and we answer questions and try to see what's next.